Rough week for the White House that was supposed to focus on health care. Instead, it's all about Russia, 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 and Russian meddling in the 2016 election. The president's son, Donald Trump Jr., is now squarely in the middle of the controversy, having released his emails about a meeting he had in June of 2016 with a Russian lawyer who was offering incriminating information on Hillary Clinton. Trump Jr. pushed out the emails in a series of tweets shortly before the New York Times was ready to make them public. In the wake of the revelations, legal experts are now weighing in on words like treason and conspiracy and collusion. So what do these specifically mean, and do they apply to what we've been hearing this week? Here to walk us through the legal jargon and all the questions of laws, Kathleen Clark. She's a law professor at Washington University, specializing in government ethics, legal ethics, and campaign law. Nice to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So everybody who ever wanted to be a lawyer, is a lawyer, or wants to talk about the law has been really digging into sort of all the nuance of this particular case, especially around the release of emails. The words they're using are words like collusion, treason, and conspiracy. So I'd like to start there just with definitions. What exactly is the definition of collusion?
So collusion is not a legal term at all. We've been tossing that term around for months now, and I think it's a useful summary of the idea of people or organizations working together toward a common goal. But that's not actually a legal term. There are other legal terms that are relevant here, including conspiracy and aiding and abetting. And these are terms that are relevant against the background of our campaign finance laws that prohibit foreigners from contributing, making contributions, or providing anything of value to a U.S. campaign.
Part of what seems to play a role is the role of solicitation.
Correct.
So when Donald Jr. responded, "I love it," to what was being pitched to him by the publicist, and there may have been a phone call in there or not, it's hard to tell at this moment, is that count as solicitation?
So solicitation does not require any kind of magic words to be said. I think that the email exchange is suggestive that there may have been solicitation. I don't think that there's slam dunk evidence at this point that Donald Trump Jr. engaged in solicitation. I think of the meeting as evidence, the fact that they were agreed to go to the meeting and the information that they had about the meeting, what the purpose of the meeting was, as possible evidence that they were facilitating a foreign provision of something of value to the campaign. But I wouldn't call their participation in the meeting illegal as such or a crime as such. There's not a prohibition on Americans meeting with Russians or any foreigners. So if President Donald Trump, had been part of an agreement, if he had agreed to take action to further the Russians' provision of something of value to the campaign, then he himself could face criminal liability for a conspiracy to violate U.S. election law.
Can you prosecute a sitting president?
Well, the Justice Department asserts that you can't, but I don't believe that's a settled question. There is, as a practical matter, however, it seems unlikely that Attorney General Sessions would want to be any part of that. But he, of course, has agreed to recuse from the Russia investigation, so it may not be up to him. Instead, it would be presumably up to Special Counsel Mueller. But the regulation under which he was appointed requires him to abide by Justice Department policies. And while I believe it may be possible to indict a president, I don't think this Justice Department is going to do it.
It's nice to have you talking with us. Kathleen Clark, thank you so much.
Thank you.